I lived with the Royal Air Force all my life. My father was a high-ranking officer in the Royal Air Force, and therefore I'd lived for many years on RAF stations. And as a small child, I used to try and get rides on airplanes whenever I could, the transport airplanes. And I was always hanging around the hangars and the maintenance during our school holidays. And there came a time when I got into the film business and the television business as a floor manager, and I earned enough money to get myself a flying license, a private pilot's license. But I had to work as an air traffic controller in order to pay for it. So, by chance, one of the people that was subsequently going to work on the Battle of Britain suggested it would be an ideal situation for me, with all of these three together, to control the aerial sequences from the air as an assistant director in the air. Well, of course, it's boys' own stuff. The stuff of dreams. There I was with 30 or 40 of the world's greatest old airplanes, airplanes which I revered, touched. Suddenly I was climbing all over them. Suddenly I was controlling them. It was fantastic. It was a wonderful opportunity.
After I finished this series called The Secret Agent and The Prisoner, I was asked to take over the second unit of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. So that's when I met a lot of aerial cameramen, Skeets Kelly, Johnny Jordan, both who were the key guys on Battle of Britain. And so we shot all the balloon sequences over the cliffs of Dover, over to Germany and the Mad King's Castle. And that was for Cubby Broccoli. And I guess because him and Harry Saltzman were partners with the Bond movies, that is probably how I got recommended. Get this kid, he knows about flying.
It was not mainstream at all. We were a very small unit, the aerial sequence unit, of about a dozen people who operated the Mitchell B-25. We had 3 units in the film. We had the main principal unit, which did the story.
That should damn well never have happened. Where the hell is 12th Group?
They were requested, sir.
Well, they're nowhere in sight. Find out what the devil they think they're playing at.
We had a second unit, which did a lot of the second unit flying, a lot of taxiing, taking off, landing. They also were up in the air too, but in the bombers, in the actual aircraft themselves. And the flying unit, which was based inside the Mitchell B-25, which was a perfect vehicle for filming from, because as a bomber during the war it had a boom tail. The tail fins are on a boom, so that the camera, which was a gun, of course, in the old days, can get a good swing at the back. It also had a mid-upper turret, which we converted into the control room where I sat. And it had front windows where the bomb aimer used to sit, which we converted with an optically perfect hemispheric bowl, which we shot the front shots out of. And so at any given time when we were airborne, we could shoot from the front and the back in Panavision, in 70mm Panavision. And we could control it from the central position, and I could see the whole lot from the top.
They had an aeroplane which they called the Psychedelic Monster, which had the camera in it. And they had it painted in such bright colours that none of the aircraft flying towards it would hit it. And they called it the Psychedelic Monster.
The pilot and owner of the aircraft, Jeff Hawke, decided that it should be as visible as possible in the sky, because he envisaged very close proximity shots, lots and lots of shots of the aircraft immediately behind us, or just to the left of us, or just to the right of us. And that required individual one-on-one, rather than these big formations we've talked about so much. You take 2 aircraft up, and it would be the scene where we're flying along and he says, for example, hang on, I see one down there, I'm going down, and he peels over and goes down and we go with him. It was important that he could find us again, to do it again. It's very difficult when you're all pulling around and heaving each other, you just see an airplane, a dot up there, which way is it going? What's it doing? Is it descending? Is it climbing? So it was multicoloured for that purpose.
First problems we had is that when you're shooting in Panavision, which is widescreen that this movie was shot in, to give it scale, because it was a huge, epic movie, the planes, once we got them in formation, were like little dots. You couldn't even recognize, is that a Messerschmitt? Is that a Spitfire? So the cameramen were always saying, closer, closer. Now, you got a B-25 flying at 200 miles an hour that way, and these planes are coming towards you at 200 miles an hour. and there's turbulence, and there's clouds. It has to be so precise because tragedy could happen any hour. I mean, we were always terrified of a huge collision up there.
Bernie Williams was the production manager of the aerial sequences and the second unit. So as a production manager, he was responsible for getting it all together. I mean, the mere fact that there was fuel at the airplane on time was ordered by him. The mere fact everybody was paid by him, employed by him. It was a normal unit run as a production manager will, with a schedule, looking at the budget, running it within his budgetary requirements, working very closely with the Tubby Simpson, who was the chief maintenance officer. Because at any one time you could have 6 or 7 of them with mechanics swarming all over them. They went down. New parts had to be sought for and fought for and got and shipped from somewhere and put in. So, I mean, he was not only just in charge of a film unit with God knows how many cameras we had. We had 4 or 5 Panavision cameras alone, all the latest Panavision gear, as well as a normal 35mm. He had a large crew there, and he was keeping us there. We lived on the airfield, and we were fed on the airfield. We slept at the airfield. So as a production manager, he was running all of that in total administration. It was, I mean, a tremendous experience for him, tremendous, because he was running an air force.
Now, as fighter controllers, you'll be joining an organization which, thank the good Lord, was not rushed up hastily yesterday. It'll be a pain in the neck to the enemy when he comes. It's the Joker up our sleeves.
They shunted me down to Tablada airfield near Seville in Spain to take over to do the aerial shots, they said, the aerial shots. So I arrived in Tablada to see 1 Spitfire, 1 helicopter, 4 camera crew, an assistant director, and about 50 Heinkels and 60 Messerschmitts laying on the airfield. That was the aerial unit at that time. So it was a little confusing to me because I thought, well, how are we going to shoot all the aerial sequences with this small group of people? But it was the teething process for us all to discover that there was a monster out there and we were going to have to face it at some point. Well, they said, you know, here's your aerial unit, and I thought, Battle of Britain, surely this is about up in the air there, because that's what the Battle of Britain represents, is the aerial battles to save England. But all the emphasis seemed to be on the ground with all the actors, and that was where the big unit was. And here I am with this little mini unit, and I think that was like the thinking at the time was, yeah, they'll do a few shots of airplanes flying about, and then we'll figure it all out later. And as I say, it started off with 8 people and became a crew of 740 by the time we got into the serious battle scenes. I started in Spain for 5 weeks. I was told I'd be in Spain. Okay. And I started in March of 68. I think they fired me in October of 68. I mean, that's 6 weeks turned into 6 months. That's why the film went over budget. David Bracknell was the second unit director. He'd worked with Guy Hamilton as an assistant director, and he was given this huge break by Guy Hamilton. So he understood how Guy worked and how Guy thought and what Guy wanted. So David would be at the briefings every day, and each day we would agree what we were going to do that day in terms of which planes could fly, flying hours, how many pilots had rested, and so on. What were the weather conditions? How big was the airspace available that particular day, because it would change constantly.
We could have been thrown out of a range where we were filming if we didn't do it properly, if we didn't stay in the right areas, if we drifted into controlled airspace or anything like that. You always needed the air traffic controller up there to get them home, because once these pilots were concentrating so heavily on what they were doing, navigation went out of the window, and we took it to extremes where you always needed to know how to get back, because you had to zigzag through full military operational aircraft stations. I mean, the sort of 4-minute warning stations.
One day, for example, we were filming at Duxford, and we eventually got all our planes up in the air, and they were flying around in complete formation. And a squadron of Vulcan bombers came straight up through the sky and through our formation. They didn't know we were there, and we didn't know they were there. I mean, that's terrifying. That was a day of rest for everybody and a change of underwear. The responsibility of going up is huge. There were lives up there at stake. There were lives at stake of the people photographing them. And if a plane fell out of the sky and landed in someone's house or a street or a town, that would have been catastrophic for this movie.
The aerial photography on the picture, I'm sure, was dangerous. I mean, it was dangerous shooting from the ground because they would come very low. I was nearly killed on 2 occasions on it. I think risks were taken then were far greater than will probably be allowed now. But when you did have a Spitfire or an M109 coming in at you at a great speed and clearing your head just by about 3 or 4 feet, and it was about 10 feet off the ground, it was very scary, actually. A lot of it was scary.
And that's why we had to be very meticulous about every scene we did. Nothing was done, from the hip, ever. We actually used to sit on the ground every day with David Bracknell, who was the second unit director, Commandante Santa Cruz, who was in charge of all the Spanish pilots. Then they would get out all the little aeroplanes. They would get out storyboards, because we had to have storyboards, because it gets too confusing.
And we rehearsed it, much to their chagrin and much to our embarrassment. We rehearsed it with everybody taking a position on the hangar floor. And you are blue 3, you are blue 4, right, action. And we all shuffled across like that, and the others shuffled across like that. And they were indignant about doing this, of course, these pilots, because they can do it in their sleep. But we had to know whether it would work or not. We used to be dispatched up in the air with storyboards. This is what I want it to look like. Well, these are comic cuts. I mean, you've got a shot of a Messerschmitt here and a Spitfire bearing down on it, and it's there forever, isn't it? But in reality, it's boom, and it's gone. It's 4 frames. And so we've got to try and work out how best to do that. And the terribly sad thing about the aerial sequence of the Battle of Britain is we just about worked out how to do it when it was time to stop. It took us the length of the film to work out how to get it right. We had a terrible problem with authenticity. The camouflage was so good, and the aircraft was so authentic that we couldn't see them in the air. Because obviously camouflage is designed to hide the aircraft from the enemy, and we couldn't find it either. So you will notice when we're filming that we filmed most of the aircraft against white cloud, and that's how we got away with it. So there was a lot more white cloud than possibly there was in that glorious summer over Kent where most of this took place. There was a lot more white cloud, and we actually looked for white cloud to get the lighting right.
The Spanish Air Force were using Heinkels, which were, again, old. I think we were all surprised that the Spanish Air Force were using them, but they were using them for training pilots. So the Spanish Air Force were able, through Hamish Mahadi, who was the collector of all these airplanes, who was a courageous, highly decorated bomber in World War II, his job was to get this Air Force, the Harry Saltzman Air Force. So all the big formation sequences of the Heinkels and Messerschmitts were shot in Spain, with one Spitfire coming in to attack them. So we had to get all those master shots. But the actual dogfights were done with 2 Heinkels. We could only take 2 Heinkels to England. And we took 16 Messerschmitts to England. So we were shooting parts of the dogfight in the Battle of Britain in Spain with 1 Spitfire and 50 Heinkels and 60 Messerschmitts. And then we would go to England to do all the Spitfire and Hurricane sequences with 2 Heinkels and 60 Messerschmitts. It's a crazy jigsaw puzzle, but somehow it worked. And that was because we had to be meticulous with storyboarding and all these models and have an exact plan. I had to fly the 2 Heinkels and the 17 Messerschmitts back from Tablada, Spain, right up through Spain, across France, across the English Channel, into Duxford, which is probably 60, 70 miles north of London. But we have all these planes covered in German swastikas. You know, that's not a good thing. People didn't like to see those aeroplanes flying about, even in 1968. We had to get special permissions to fly over France with the markings still on the aircraft.
You are always restricted to the lowest common denominator. So different aircraft have different amount of fuel, and some aircraft are more efficient at burning that fuel than others. Also, if you're in formation, you use more. Trying to keep in formation, there's a lot of full throttle, no throttle, full throttle, no throttle. That sort of juggling. You can't set it for lean and constant RPM, which is what an aircraft prefers. So we had an hour and a half, if we were lucky. from takeoff to landing.
We would fuel these aircraft up, and they would have to take off one at a time. So it would take 45 minutes to get 20 planes up in the air and get them into formation. That took an hour just to get them all in a group. Then we would have to fly for like 25 minutes with our camera helicopter or B-25 camera plane to get them in the position for action. So now we've lost an hour and a half, and now the pilots are saying, I've only got about half an hour's fuel left. So we would then have to shoot that particular section. It was only like one shot before we had to get them back down again, which would take the same amount of time because they could only land one at a time. That could be done under perfect weather conditions. We would never go up unless there was a hole in the clouds, so we could get back down in emergencies. And there were emergencies. And so I remember Harry Saltzman calling me and saying, we've got to shut down this flying unit. It's costing a fortune. We're over budget. We have to finish. And you're shut down every day at Duxford with this bad weather. What are we going to do? I said, let's fly to where the sun is. Where's that? I said, France. So, okay. So we flew to the south of France. We were chasing the sun all through that summer. And we couldn't shoot downwards in France because all the earth was bright red, which didn't match the Kent farmland. So we did all the shooting up scenes in France, and then we came back and did all the shooting down scenes for Kent. So between three countries, that was the Battle of Britain. 3 different countries, 3 different skies, and yet it all worked. It's called movie magic.
And the weather was so bad in England, we went to France, and I had to take a convoy down, of aircraft down. And our first stop was supposed to be Dinant, and the weather closed in, so we diverted to Le Touquet. And even then the weather was closing in, and we needed radar. Well, of course, they haven't even got the Le Touquet frequency. So what we had to do was leave them above the cloud, circling, pick on 3, get one behind the tail and one on each wing. I'm listening to the radar controller in my earpiece and talking to them on their frequency. So I've got this ear listening to air traffic, and this ear listening to them, which is a terrible thing to do, I have to say, whilst they talked us down. And they followed the Mitchell B-25. And as long as they formated with him through the cloud, we were doing radar controlled approaches, we pulled up 100 feet above the runway and pulled around and went off again and left them to land. Me still clearing them to land as we're going up to pick up the next 3 and bring them down. Well, we did that 4 times. So we did 4 radar controlled descents, one after another, pulling each of these guys in. And when the last one got down, as he went to the landing position you've already spoken and dropped his tail, the fuel ran out. He had that little left. That was hairy.
The sad thing for the movie was the weather. I think the weather killed us because it would have been a much more less expensive movie. It would have been far more enjoyable to shoot because we lost so much time waiting around for weather.
Had a very strange end. We slowly thinned out till in the end it was 1 helicopter and 1 shot left. And I think it was Canfield in the script bailing out. We had this trick with the camera and the helicopter here. The 2-seater comes along. We've got a dummy in the back seat and the back cockpit's open. And he rolls and the parachute falls out down there. We got a could do better letter back the next day. Thanks very much. Could we have the shot, please? Where the man actually bails out and the parachute opens. So we did it again the 3rd day. We had a parachute expert there who said, 5 seconds after this body leaves this airplane, it will open. It's on the clock. It didn't. We had to send it back, and we all got fired. They just ran back and said, if you can't get the shot, you may as well come home. You obviously don't know what you're doing. And that was the end of it. This desperate plastic dummy was falling to the ground, and at the last moment, a little bit of parachute just whisked up, but too late, it hit that deck. Surprise, surprise. Opening night, go to watch it, it's one of the most featured shots in the film. So we got fired for one of the most featured shots in the film. It's in the aerial sequence ballet. And you suddenly see the music swells, it's the big day, and the music takes over everything. And it's wonderful music, and the aerial sequence commences, and then there's this long and then this body falls out, no parachute, and we follow the body down because the camera did, hoping beyond all hope that the parachute would open. It doesn't, it doesn't, it doesn't, it doesn't. The music goes with it, we stay with it. It's probably the longest shot in the sequence, so we got the sack for it. But we'd done that by then. Mm.
Thanks awfully, old chap.
My mother, she remembers those times. She's written about those times. The times when friends would go off in the evening in bombers and they'd have a cup of tea first in the pub, and she lived in the pub down the road from the airfield. And then 3 out of 10 of them not come back. And you had to learn to live with that and move on. And the ones that did come back came for tea the next day and didn't talk about the ones that hadn't. It was a very dramatic time. And these young men lost their lives at an appallingly large rate.